What's up, everybody? My name is Jordan Farmer, and this is episode 1 of the Uncommon Ground podcast. Today we're going to be doing a recap of 2020, the coronavirus, the Black Lives Matter movement, the George Floyd situation, police brutality, the election, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, what the Congress and the Trump administration has done in response to the pandemic, the good, the bad, and the ugly of all that, and most importantly, in a part 2 to this podcast, I'm going to go comprehensively through everything economic in politics, and it will be fixing the economy in one less than an hour episode. So stay tuned for that. But for now, we're gonna dive directly into COVID-19. So the best place to start, I think, with this is with a little bit of background information and context in regards to China. It's the most obvious thing to say, but first and foremost, they are a totalitarian regime, which means they control their people, they control the news media, they control information flow in and out of China, but mostly within China. And if you know anything about the history of totalitarian regimes, or even if you just understand the history of human beings when they're given a position where they can hurt somebody and they're the kind of person who wants to hurt somebody, they will do some disgusting and crazy things. But even more so than that, for Nazi Germany, their vision of a world power, of being the singular world power taking over the world, or other totalitarian regimes, they'll do anything in order to forward that agenda. No amount of death is going to really matter. The communist vision or the Nazi vision or whatever the vision may be, the vision of the collective is more important than any single individual life, by definition, if we're talking about a true, in my opinion, a true totalitarian regime. You don't value individual life. It's never ever really come with that. I guess maybe kings or other people might have been just, but that's beside the point. They're evil, that's the point. And they're evil in a way that means that they've probably done things that are worse than your imagination could create. They've actually done those things that are worse than you could ever imagine as a regular person. They also have implemented the one-child policy over the previous decade. So they've had a population where you have two parents getting together, having one kid, generation over generation. That's cutting in half the size of those generations. And even though they've ended the forced abortions and the real crackdown of the one-child policy in recent years, at least we think they have, the cultural, the effect of the propaganda and the cultural sort of programming has made it so that even today in China, you're considered selfish if you want to have more than one kid. That programming's still there, which means that that in and of itself is its own issue and its own mistake, and it's the kind of mistake that can only take place when you have centralized control manipulating the society at large in a bad way. It's actually is possible for them to do it in a good way. It's just that the consequences of a mistake are system-wide, and we're seeing that. Their population is an upside-down pyramid. It's cutting in half every generation. Eventually, you're going to end up with two people who are brother and sister, and that's all you got left. Or actually, I guess one person who's a boy or a girl, and that's all you have left, actually. So obviously, it's not a sustainable system, but along the way, there's other challenges, even if they can right the ship and correct for this and just have a couples of two have two kids, then you have a more even population going forward. Even if they fix that, they still have a situation where their working base, their tax base, their productive base in society, and their younger class, but that's increasingly becoming smaller relative to this higher upper class. And this represents one of the main obstacles to China's global, China's ambitions to be a global superpower. It costs money to feed people. It costs money to house people. It costs money to clothe people. And that money, especially if you have a culture, as many cultures do, in China particularly, where you take care of your elders and you're responsible for taking care of your elders. In a society like that, that means that their consumer base, their money-making class, their middle class, will actually lose a lot of money in taking care of those older folks, and that will represent a competitive disadvantage for the collective system, which, remember, is the most important thing, particularly in China. And my opinion, China is a hybrid between a communist and a fascist system. There is a Chinese supremacist angle to it. They do have racial minorities in concentration camps, so there's very, very strong Nazi resemblances with the Chinese government today. But in addition to that, they do have those communist values technically in their system. They don't believe in any kind of property rights, intellectual property rights. They believe that if you create a company, or you create a product, the idea behind that product, it belongs to the collective. It doesn't belong to you individually. You don't get any kind of patents. That's been a part of their system for a while, and that's one of the gaps in trade that can't be crossed, really, unless you have serious reform in China. Because if they don't respect patents there, they don't respect individual intellectual property, then how can they trade with countries that do effectively? That's a problem for another day. So, China has a problem with too many old people. And just to point this out, just because I like to take digs at people, I've been saying for years, I hate when I hear people say we have an overpopulation problem. I understand what they're saying, and I'm not saying they're a bad person just for having said it. But very few people reflect on their words, and when you say we're overpopulated, you're saying there's too many people, and any problem that you highlight, you're either complaining. Any problem that you bring up that doesn't have a solution is just complaining. So there's an implied sort of, we need a solution to any problem. So like, we have too many people, don't have any babies. But the people that believe that, or the people that are saying that, are some of the people who probably would make better, or at least more conscientious and responsible parents than others. Some of them don't want to be parents. I don't want to push that on anyone, but it's a dumb reason to not have kids. It's because you think there's too many people in the world already. But anyways, people that say the world is overpopulated, who should we kill? That's my question. Who should we kill? That when you say things like that, when you say things, you have to be careful, because when you say things, you're implying some sort of a solution. Ergo, if you could get rid of old people, particularly, we'll bring it back to China. And this is mainly an issue with China because of their one-child policy. It's not a global problem. It's not something we really have to be that concerned about. With our economic system, we're having plenty of babies, and because of immigration, and because of young immigration in particular, that population imbalance problem won't be one, even if we have less babies. So there's workarounds there, but that's again another much more complicated topic. So China would definitely benefit from removing a good significant chunk of their older population. Now, could you ever do that with boots on the ground? Probably. I would assume if you came and you killed my grandma, I'm going to have a problem with you, and that's not going to work so well in terms of 1.4 billion Chinese people, or we'll say 1.31 billion Chinese people against the 90 million Communist Chinese Party members. They could do some damage, I'm just saying. So, if you were to try to tackle that problem, you would not want to have boots on the ground. You'd want to have some sort of other mechanism for clearing out the older population in a less obvious way. Totalitarian regimes are as evil as they get, and China is as smart and sophisticated as a totalitarian regime. I think I said that wrong, but they are smarter than any totalitarian regime we have ever seen before, and we need to understand that. Now, data is tricky about China, but the outside tests have at least confirmed this, or people going and talking about this has confirmed this. They have an IQ, average IQ about 6 points higher than Americans on average, and they have 4 times as many people. So they have probably 6 or 7 times as many geniuses as we have in the United States, at least. At least that many times. So they're very, very smart. That's the point. So there's a cynical old political phrase called "never let a crisis go to waste," and it comes up a lot. You'll hear me say it a lot in future videos. It's just how it goes. I think what happened here... Oh, I haven't finished. So that's kind of the background perspective on China in terms of how this virus broke out. The official narrative is that it was bat meat or porcupine meat, whatever, tainted meat at a wet market that got someone sick, and somehow that turned into a respiratory flu, and then they gave it to other people. The story I believe, and there's that official narrative that I think is crap, and then there's degrees of variation off of that are unconfirmable, but we can speculate, and there have been some reports and some intelligence that's been leaked in regards to this. What I believe happened, and within that range of conspiracies, mine that I grasp onto, is that the Wuhan lab of virology that was flagged in 2018 for bad safety practices probably let an intern. There's reports that a female, specifically a female intern, was mishandling or just came into contact with and was contaminated by this disease. Brett Weinstein, a very brilliant biologist, says that this disease has all the marks and all the irregular behaviors associated with genetically modified organisms. Like in the lab, like we're playing with them, we're playing with the flu, just to learn things or whatever we're doing. I believe that this intern was contaminated by this disease, and it was hushed up because mistakes don't happen in communist China. There is no war in Ba Sing Se. There is no virus in China. So I think they hushed it up. And then I think cases of a new flu that were undetected and new started popping up and spreading because that intern with her boyfriend reportedly went to the wet markets where this then spread. So it did not spread from an animal directly. It was an intern from the Wuhan lab of virology or Institute of Virology that got contaminated and then spread it at this wet market. That case one, that intern getting sick, is tracked through the geneticists and all that kind of stuff back to mid to late November of last year. January 14th, we'll fast forward, January 14th, China top officials are in the midst of brand new, crazy, groundbreaking trade negotiations with the Trump administration. Wow! We're in the middle of an impeachment scandal, the likes of which we haven't seen since 5 minutes ago when they last were going crazy about what Trump has done. The Ukraine thing is another video. We'll make it another time. And January 14th, China, they might have signed something actually by then. I don't have the dates on the signing of the deal with China. But what I do know is that January 14th, they believe there was no human-to-human transmission. That was their official word to the rest of the world, that they did not know, or that they assumed that there was not. What does that mean? Well, what that means is that from, we'll say, the last week of November, all of December, and at least 2 to 4 weeks in January, this disease was spreading completely unobstructed, and China was shutting down the narratives or any information coming out about the spread. They were shutting it all down, keeping it quiet. I believe what happened was that this was originally a mistake, and then it started to spread, and then to cover up for the Communist Chinese Party's mistakes, they tried to keep it shut down. But then it kept spreading. It was actually out of their control, and the Chinese Communist Party, somewhere along the way, had a choice to make. And that was, we need to do these lockdowns, and we should try to contain this disease. If we do it as soon as humanly possible, then very few people will die. We still have all the old people. We have a disease that disproportionately kills old people and old and sick people, people with obesity and stuff, but mainly old and obese. Lost my train of thought a little bit there. So they could have shut it off immediately. They could let it go a little bit and let it clear out their old population a bit, thin the herd a little bit, and then shut it down, but keep it contained within China, and then they suffer under that scenario, they suffer the economic consequences of the lockdown and shutting down production and consumption in an economy en masse. But the rest of the world doesn't get that disease, so there's cutting it off immediately. There's that middle stage where they let it kill off their old people, but they don't let it get out of control, I guess, or something kind of in between there, and it doesn't get out to the rest of the world. Or we try to contain it within our country as much as possible and mitigate quietly, amass all the PPE we can. They bought over 2 billion pieces of PPE in this time period we're talking about, from all around the world, and let this disease actually spread out to the rest of the world and infect the rest of the world, and we'll mitigate it here as much as possible, financially benefit by reselling all of that PPE back out to the world. We already produce all the medical goods, so that we'll already be benefiting from this pandemic economically in that way, with all the different drugs that they make and all that kind of stuff. And then beyond that, if the rest of the world has to shut down economically along with China, or even longer than China, to fight this disease off, because China, for whatever the reasons may be, China's government doesn't care about their people dying as much. They just feel like they can protect themselves, so it doesn't matter, whatever the problem is. They might actually get less of an economic shutdown because they have so many people, and the death is able to be, the actual scale of the brand new deaths is actually able to be suppressed and dampened down. There were reports of crematoriums ordering in numbers of about 5,000 urns per order, whereas they normally would order about 1,200. And what does that mean? That means that they had almost over four times the death, and at a certain point, I think this was in December or early January, 4 times the normal amount of death that they would have, that provides the business for their crematoriums. It's craziness, massive death. Personally, I think that we have beyond a Holocaust, like a super Holocaust, or at the bare minimum, a Holocaust type situation where millions and millions and millions of Chinese elderly folks have prematurely died because of this, because they could not let this crisis go to waste. They had to play it at every stage to their maximum benefit. And I believe that they did. And I believe that we're at a stage now where we have to try to decouple our economies. We have to try to decouple our economies from China unless China seriously reforms, because we've experienced this year the dangers of having regular and consistent and frequent contact and travel and tourism and trade with China, period. If we didn't have the same kind of high frequency immigration, tourism type immigration, and we had much less trade, or we were just only trading with people that are our friends, we would have been in a much better situation with this whole problem in China. Okay, so I think the Chinese Communist Party, I think it was a mistake initially, but they let it spread because for strategic reasons, it made way more But for strategic reasons, it actually made more sense for them to let this thing spread out, let the global economy actually collapse, so that they could actually gain ground relative to everybody else in this race, and that will inform some of the things I talk about later economically as to why our approach here in the United States is actually not quite as dumb as everybody thinks. Not quite as disorganized either. But it just makes all the sense of the world as to why the Chinese Communist Party took advantage of the situation. They not only tried to get catch the rest of the world off guard as much as possible, they tried to gain as much, I believe they tried to gain as much of an advantage over us as possible. They've got the PVE. They started getting samples and doing research on, vaccines and all that kind of stuff. They got a huge advantage on research for all that. Just across the board, they just tried to juke us. They tried to wrong foot us, and they've done a good job. The world's in chaos right now, and China's been pushing against Hong Kong and Taiwan, and the international sort of coalition is busy handling their own stuff, as well as talking smack on Trump. And unfortunately, China is not being pushed back against quite as strongly as they should be. So that's why we're in this situation now. Once it hit, so now we'll talk about the Trump response to all this, and then Congress's response eventually. So January 30th is when it was officially announced that it was a pandemic, and that was also the date that Trump, it was the 30th or the 31st, the last day of January, I believe, Trump implemented the China travel ban, which was a brilliant move. He was getting all kinds of crap for it, and I understand, like, whenever you repeat what Trump says about himself, or what Trump says, period, so many people just tune out. But sometimes the man's right, so please don't discount what I say just because it might sound like what he's saying as well. But, like, if you want to understand what kind of a president Joe Biden would have made in this situation, or if you want to understand really any Democrat empty politician that's just rhetoric, what they would do, Harris, Kamala, anyone who is an empty Democrat politician in that moment would have done what Joe Biden did, in my opinion, and most of them did that. Called Donald Trump a xenophobe for cutting off travel from another country. Not permanent travel, not permanent immigration. He wasn't attacking them. He wasn't demeaning the people of China. He was just saying, we got to stop. I think there's a disease here. We should cut off travel so that we're safer. Anyone else want to do it? No one else did it. And unfortunately, after that initial great move that I will give Trump credit for, he sat on his thumb for a while and did not take the next necessary steps in order to minimize the disease's impact here. Also, he did not take the necessary steps to prevent this disease from coming onto this continent. This is a good point for me to sort of insert this. We often talk about peer nations and comparing the United States to peer nations. What you need to understand is that each country has its own geographical factors, then it has its own population factors, then it has its own economic wealth factors, then it has its own internal healthcare system factors, and all of these things affect their ability to fight off this disease. Now, the geography thing is what I want to focus on. If you're New Zealand or Australia or Japan and you're an island, it's going to be a little bit easier for you to keep any unwanted diseased people from entering. It's going to be easier because they have to swim there, because you have a literal, like, natural border keeping you safe. Whereas if you're in the United States or China, just to remember China, you're in a landlocked, you know, we have Canada above us, Mexico below us, and China is, you know, surrounded by everybody. You can't keep that kind of transmission from happening unless you have like the most locked down borders, period, which is just another example as to why we need a more secure border. And that's another video, but essentially we need a secure border, and we should pursue every avenue that adds to the effectiveness of our border security. There's human trafficking problems on the border. 30% in the pilot program of testing children to see if the children that come with migrants on the border are actually related to them, or if they're being trafficked. Of the tests that were run, 30% were actually not families, which means a lot of human trafficking has been getting through the border for years. It's disgusting. It's the #1 fight we need to be having right now, and the border security is extremely important. Border security is extremely important when it comes to this. But yeah, there's a lot of factors that affect your ability to protect yourself from this disease. You don't have testing, you have problems. If you don't have companies that can create the testing and distribute the testing, you have problems. So if you don't have a good economy already, that alone is an enormous thing going against you, is the distribution of capitalist systems. The decentralized sort of response is tremendous, and you want to be able to take advantage of that. Even a centralized, you know, rollout is going to be very difficult to do, even if you're well organized and everything, if you're dealing with a large population, whatever other problems. So anyways, getting back to Trump. So he failed to have a European ban. He failed to he should have shut down travel, period, because he should have, if he had been talking to advisors or someone with a little bit more sense than what he has in his current sort of. Look, I like a lot of his appointments in his cabinet, actually, but someone should have been there to say, hey, it's not just enough to get, you know, people can go from country A to country Z and then cut to country B. They don't have to just go A to B. And if he had realized that, he could have shut down travel across the board. But, you know, hindsight's 20/20, and you know, we all could have seen that. You know, now we can all see that, but at the time it was not necessarily that obvious. And when a guy is making a move that is going against everybody else, and he's right, and then people who were wrong in the first place criticize him for having not done more of that thing they said he shouldn't do in the first place, it's a joke. It's a joke. He should have done better. He should have cut off immigration, but he didn't. And he still did better than anybody else. He did better than what Joe Biden would have done. Joe Biden would have said, what? Shutting down immigration? That's xenophobic. We should just let all of the infected Chinese people come here now and hug them and sniff their daughters and shit. Sorry for the language, but sniff their daughters and stuff, because it's not xenophobic. It's creepy and pedophilic, but it's not xenophobic, and it's not racist. It's not whatever isms that have nothing to do with character you want to throw out there, whatever other identity things you want to throw out there, which have their own value but are overvalued by too many people today, and many of those people are racists or sexists. The Trump administration, once we had 15 days to slow the spread, we had the activation of the Defense Production Act, and once Trump got going, he's done tremendous work. So he has increased domestic production of PPE via the Defense Production Act. He did ventilators. He did some other PPE equipment, gowns, and all that stuff, and he's talked about that. But he did do masks and stuff like that. And his approach from the beginning has been trying to facilitate the genius of America to respond to this virus as much as humanly possible, and he's done a very good job of doing that with his internal policies. At the FDA, his policy of accelerating all of the sort of regulatory, the artificial regulatory time barriers to getting treatments for COVID-19, like discovered and developed, tested, cleared for safety, and passed through. And I don't think they're not cutting corners. It's not what they're doing. They have a limited number of people that can process a certain number of claims for various drugs and everything, and they have their normal swath of paperwork they have to deal with. What he's saying is we're prioritizing all applications around this particular disease, and we're going to sort of like in a focused way facilitate more those companies working on this disease to get this time just to get the time crunched down as much as possible. This is a very, very free market, very pro-capitalism view you have to have in order to come up with a policy like that and to believe that it's worth doing. They're still collecting data and making sure that everything's safe, but all of the gaps in between those stages they're trying to shrink to zero, so that from when we knew this disease happened to when we're done with this disease as a world, not just the United States, but as a globe, as a human species, he wants to help fix the problem for everybody, and he's maximized the American economy and the American medical system, which is the best, one of the best I guess entities for accomplishing this goal. Yeah, I believe we can do it. I believe we will do it, and we are ahead of track. Some other policies that Trump has done. So we did the Defense Production Act. He eventually did get the immigration stuff sorted out. It just took too long. And then we did the 15 days to slow the spread. That ended up being 45 days to slow the spread, and that was kind of a mess. Just on messaging, but at the end of the day, you got to do what you got to do. In the beginning, we had some of our official experts at the CDC playing political games. Now, what do I mean by that? A politician tells the public what they want to hear, not what is the truth in the best sense of the word. And the truth in the best sense of the word was that we knew this was a respiratory disease, and we knew that masks at a bare minimum would help. They might not help 100%, but if they help 70%, that's better than zero. And if you have 2 people wearing masks, then you have 70 3 in 10 chance for one person, but a 3 in 10 chance for the other person. So you actually end up with less than a 3 in 10 chance that they both would have it, because it's unlikely that you don't. It's not additive in that sense. Anyways, that's a math thing, but. We should have had mandatory masks. Sorry, Dr. Fauci, our Surgeon General, and that sort of whoever was the originator of the ideas, and I personally believe it's Fauci. I don't want to get into an argument about it. It doesn't matter. Someone in the beginning made the decision to make to say the political thing, and I don't believe it was Trump, because Trump doesn't say the political thing. He says the salesman thing, and he says the sort of fighting back thing, but he doesn't just say things because he thinks it is politically expedient directly. Maybe I'm splitting hairs, and I'm off. I mean, I'm not saying this is an absolute thing, but I'm jumping around. The point is, in the very beginning, someone made the decision to say that masks are not as effective for the general public as they actually are, to undersell the demand, to try to sort of fake out and suppress the demand for PPE, because they felt like there was not enough legitimate PPE for the medical community. Well, that is a political decision, and that is not an expertise decision. An expertise decision would have said, we just telling President Trump, we don't have enough PPE for our medical professionals, and we need to figure out how to do that, and we should ask the American population to not buy it as much so that we can get it to those people. And then you would have Trump being like, we have a whole bunch of companies that can do manufacturing and build a plant in about 2 weeks, so if we shut down the economy for 2 weeks, 15 days to slow the spread, and then we targeted the PPE, then we can actually solve that problem. No one's misinformed. We have great messaging from the very beginning, and we actually tackle this disease a whole lot better. That's not how it went down, obviously. That's how I wish it would have went down, but that's not how it went down. The way it went down was that someone decided that we should, lie to the people to make them do what we want them to do, to manipulate them, to play to the people with our rhetoric, and that was crap, and that was unfortunate. That was a mistake, and we've since righted the course, and eventually Trump, who is a guy who, once he makes up his mind, is incredibly difficult to challenge, because he, from the beginning of his administration, he brings in wave after wave of meetings. He's in meetings all day with all kinds of people who are telling him about these various problems, and he comes up in the things he understands, and that he, like trade or economics and business, he will be a little bit more forceful on, not necessarily have to consult as many people to get to the other side of that negotiation, whatever. But when it comes to things like medical stuff and diseases, he has to rely on experts. And I believe you can judge a man by who he surrounds himself with, but I also believe that a man can only be as strong as his strongest experts around him. So if the head of the CDC, who's been there for 45 years and is the establishment stamped guy, is playing politics because he's actually a bureaucrat and not an actual practicing doctor, in the sense that he hasn't been practicing in a long time, mistakes happen. Mistakes happen. It's not a mistake in the fact that it was unintentional, but in that it was just the wrong move. Now, moving on. So the mask thing was a mess. The mask thing was a mess on the messaging side, but on the production side, they've delivered. They've created. We have more masks than we need. We have a surplus. I was just at a store that was literally just giving them out to customers because they're so cheap now. It was just good. They could just toss them out. All right. Taking one step back, Trump has tried to use the decentralized, responsive sort of network of the private industry to respond to this disease, because at the end of the day, it is the best system for doing it. You can take centralized action in order to guide it, and that's what the FDA is doing. But in order for this disease to actually be defeated, you need that decentralized and highly educated and highly competent private sector to respond. And you can need to have a bunch of people competing for that $1 trillion contract of, we have the vaccine, now 500 million doses are going to be needed in the first week. That represents quite a bit of profit. That motivates people a whole hell of a lot more than, all right guys, we need to do this. Even a Manhattan Project type of situation can be better, but it's not necessarily the best way to go, and it's not necessary. All of those people are meeting anyways. You should try to bring people together as much as possible, and I believe they have, but it's not. This is a long-winded defense of the Trump administration's response on all those fronts. Now, the final one The economic response, I'm not going to go into explaining, I'm not going to go deep into explaining every single concept. I'm just going to give you the overview, and then tomorrow with Fixing the Economy, you'll get a better sense of what I mean, the next podcast. So, the Trump administration forced the lockdowns, the 15 days to slow the spread, forced businesses to shut down. That means that consumption, any revenue coming in, and production, any actual work being done, both stop. So the demand for labor's gone, and the demand for that industry period is gone. The revenue stream is all gone for a period of time, and it's completely artificial, and it hit them out of nowhere. It's totally unfair, but it's the coronavirus. You got to do what you got to do. Lots of people have criticized the Trump administration and looked to models like Germany's response to highlight what would have been a better response than ours, with PPP loans and the stimulus checks and the enhanced unemployment. Now, I disagree with that a little bit. Those other countries, what Germany did was that they basically subsidized the cost of operations for the businesses that had to close so that they wouldn't lose any money while they were shut down, but they're still shut down. And they paid people who had to stop working, they just gave them their full salary straight out. Now that's great. That's a very efficient way of doing it. It's a very German way of doing it. However, there's opportunity lost during the pandemic by following that approach. There's lots of businesses that were already growing and already closing ahead of this, and by not allowing that to those processes to continue as they naturally would, does essentially keep your economy old while this is all going on. But more importantly, the part of the economy that is left open is actually left with less consumption, less consumers, less people out there buying stuff. Some of the businesses that are left over, other ones are actually doing better. It just depends, Amazon's obviously doing phenomenally well right now. So it entirely depends on your disease, on your disease. It entirely depends on your business. So by only subsidizing the income that was already there, you keep the income stagnant. No more wage growth, no more growth. And then also on the business side, those businesses have no way of investing in their companies or really moving forward. But the main issue is the lost. Sorry, I did this in the wrong order. Let me rephrase this. So that's one model. Same amount of consumption, because you have the income going to people. You have the same amount of consumption as you had before, so that's stagnant. And then you have the cost of operations being paying for by the businesses that are closed. Some of those businesses should have already closed, so they're actually being kept in business when they shouldn't be. But what we did here, we did the PPE loans, which just created a ratio of you pay for expenses and pay your people, which gives opportunities for bonuses and payments, and allows businesses to actually have flexibility with how they spend their capital. And then it ultimately is being forgiven and paid for by the government. Now, that's not necessarily the best system, but offering businesses that have to shut down or that have to, offering businesses that have to shut down or have to partially shut down an opportunity to actually still make money during this and still be able to invest or grow their businesses during this period, that is very beneficial. But the main thing is the stimulus checks and the enhanced unemployment. Now, people don't like the enhanced unemployment, and I understand why, and I actually kind of agree with them, that unemployed people or people that just for some reason don't have a job anymore are being paid more than they would otherwise if they had not been working. So I would have actually liked to have adopted the German model and just have 100% compensation of unemployment while people are not working. And then as we reopen the economy, you bring that down to 90 and 80%. But in terms of the stimulus and the benefit of the additional 600 in unemployment, and hopefully now 400 or whatever it ends up being now, is you get a whole lot of extra consumption that actually helps expand the economy that's still open, and you still get that growth. You don't have that stagnant sort of consumption base. You actually have it expanding. And that's one of the reasons why people like the UBI idea, is if an extra $1,000 is going into every American adult's pocket, that's a lot of extra consumption that is actually helping to pull the economy forward by creating greater demand through consumption. Then businesses want to compete for that demand and make their profit, so they add more jobs and actually compete and become more efficient, better businesses, and that creates more jobs. That actually creates more consumption because people have more income with better jobs, better paying jobs, more competitive wages and all of that, and that grows the economy too. It circles in and around that way. So although they kind of used blunt instruments and they used unconventional tools for rolling all this money out, I actually do believe that the Trump administration's response outside of the PPP loans is superior to those other responses, because it's actually creating an excess of consumption in order to counterbalance the deficit of production that we have to make up. Production creates demand for jobs. We've lost jobs because we've lost production during this shutdown. In order to bring that back up, you want to actually create that extra stimulus and have additional consumption going out there. So I actually would support more stimulus payments. I think that is actually the best thing to do to every American adult. Some people still haven't gotten them, and that's crap. We need to fix that. But every single American adult should get stimulus payments until we get the unemployment rate back down to about 4%. I don't want to get into the super long debate about it right now, but the UBI is something that you need to look, that people should take another look at. Now that's another video that I'm gonna make, but people often talk about UBI in a vacuum, and they don't compare it to our current welfare system, to the fact that nobody is in any likelihood giving up the welfare system, and we need an alternative because there are dysfunctions in the welfare system that no one is actually addressing. Because the Republicans' answer is cut them, get rid of the programs. These people that are dependent will just be fine the next day, even though they're in areas with no opportunity, and that's why they're dependent in part. That's one of the many factors. So yeah, I guess I just jumped into welfare, but that's one of the problems. If you don't have opportunity, cost of living is high. So opportunity is low, cost of living is high. You've been raised in a household where for multiple generations you don't work, you just file for assistance and you just live off of government assistance. You haven't developed any skills for actually being productive or creative. You might be creative, but you haven't developed any skills for being productive. And that means you can't actually create a living through your labor in the economy, and that means that you're dependent. And that means you're going to keep voting. And so you have to have some alternative sort of system to pull people out of that dependency, but not actually just undercut them by robbing them of the money that they are getting and the income that they do have. Because there is cost of living, and the reality is, if you end up homeless and you have nothing, literally nothing, most people think nothing is like, well, I don't have a job. That's not nothing. The people that have nothing have a hard time getting out of having nothing, because there's no base, there's no support. All the money that comes in is just trying to keep the system from failing, just trying to keep them from dying and not having enough food or anything like that. And then you also have mental illness and addiction and lots of other problems with homeless people. But Anywho, UBI deserves more attention from more people. Yeah. So, we talked about COVID-19. Oh, the election. The election. I didn't talk about the election. Oh, boy. So, here's the quickest analysis. So, I analyze politicians in a variety of ways. One of them is a triad. The person, the politician, and the public servant. Person is who they are to their friends and their family. The politician is basically how good are they at placating the masses, soothing the masses, making people feel comfortable being a good politician. And the public servant, are they delivering in their particular position? Are they delivering good results for the American people, or the Californian people, or the Fresnoian people, or whoever? Are they actually delivering as a public servant? So those are the three. And so we'll take a look at the presidential candidates along those lines. And then also, you got to understand that there's different types of roles for different public servants. There's leadership, executive type roles where you're in charge of a large system and you're making the decisions for operations of a large system. And then there's more sort of congressional lawmaking, legislative positions, being in Congress and things like that, and that is much more so just getting along with people and making deals and things of that sort. And then there are specific powers and specific positions. Attorney generals enforce the law very directly, so it's, you want them to be a lawyer typically and know what they're doing. The president has the power of foreign policy, and the president has he's a commander-in-chief, so he has a lot of power over the military. He is in control of the administrative state, so he's very, very tied into regulatory ups and downs. And the president is becoming more and more important because too many executive orders expanding the powers of the president have happened over the years, mainly well, honestly, I can't really say any president has shied away from expanding their powers. It's not their job under constitutional structure. It's not really their job to keep their own power in check. It's the other branch's job to keep their power in check. So, so it's been growing and growing. So it's a super important position. But the main factors are you're an executive in charge of a large organization. You have to know how to operate that organization effectively as a leader. And specifically for the presidency, and so that's what we're talking about with this election, with Biden and Trump and all them, you have to have sound foreign policy. You have to have sound policy when it comes to the regulatory structure. You have to have a backbone to be able to veto when it's an important bill, because that they can veto. You have to be willing to challenge people. Yeah, that about covers it. And then, you have to be a good public servant. Personally, unless someone has done something that makes them deserving to be in jail, in which case they need to be in jail, so it's not even my problem, it's a policeman's problem. Who a person is, I don't really care about that much when it comes to politics. They're doing a job. That job often is so much more important than their personality or their personal, how they are to their wife and their friends. That it's unrelated, and I don't think that just because you're a bad person in those areas, it necessarily means you're a bad person in doing your job. It's never a good sign, but they don't always come together. They don't always have to be a part of the same thing. Sometimes you can have someone who is a piece of crap but does a great job. That is possible. So, as far as them as people, Mike Pence is a milquetoast Bible Belt Christian. Trump is a larger-than-life character, and he's Trump. I mean, he's just he's a once-ever kind of character. Joe Biden is... Trump is also a creep. He said some very creepy things about Ivanka that makes me uncomfortable. Joe Biden is a career politician, a spineless and totally empty ambition-oriented career politician. He's way creepier, for me, personally, way creepier than Trump. Trump is a pussy hound and definitely has said some inappropriate things about Ivanka and other things, but Joe Biden has consistently been weirder around little girls. And there's a much more credible rape allegation against him than any of the ones that have come out against Trump, with Tara Reid. And unfortunately, the whole Me Too movement is dead silent on that, and all the Democrats that were absolutely just crazy angry against Brett Kavanaugh now are only, they don't care. And I understand, Trump is not a good guy, but you can't ignore legitimate rape allegations, and I don't think we should ignore any of the rape allegations against Trump. It's just, I think that the Tara Reid one is the most legitimate on the field. And on the Brett Kavanaugh news, so Joe Biden, empty politician, creep, useless, super weak in foreign policy. He's sold out. His son got a $1.5 billion private equity deal. He's been super friendly. He toasted champagne with the Chinese. He is super friendly to the Chinese. And he is extremely weak on foreign policy. Him and Obama screwed up Iran so thoroughly that has allowed these new peace agreements to sort of take place, because Iran was pumped up so much that all the other less crazy Muslim countries in that region were kind of like, Israel, you got some good military there. We should be friends now. Let's do some trade. And naturally, one of the most economically oriented Muslim countries, the United Arab Emirates, makes sense why they were the first one to get into that deal. Anywho, Joe Biden sucks on foreign policy. He'll super suck on regulations very quickly. Like for a restaurant, you don't want there to be food that's so low quality that it's poisonous and it kills your customers. So regulations exist to insert a base level of quality in the marketplace when all those items in the marketplace are competing along quality and price. Price, goes up, quality goes up, price goes down, quality goes down. You're creating a baseline of quality in the marketplace. That does sometimes create a baseline of cost in the marketplace, but most importantly, that cost is usually pretty minimal. And then there's regulations way above and beyond that are almost always there, or at least are so non-economically literate that they get in the way of businesses and they add extra costs and lots of time, lots of delays, fees, permits, whatever it may be. All that inefficiency. You can have them to insert a certain amount of quality. So you can insert them to insert a base level of quality, but beyond that, you can have the issue of cost of compliance, where if I'm creating a bag of potato chips for $1 and it costs me an extra 5 cents to keep up with the regulations, I will increase my prices by 5 cents. And that goes on to the consumer. That 5 cents represents an inefficiency in the system where that consumption dollar could have gone to a different job, different industry, and created something new, or just created a better environment for the existing economy. So Joe Biden sucks on regulations. He sucks on foreign policy. He was a senator, a useless senator, but he was a senator. So he doesn't have any executive experience, and he's been there in 50 years, so he doesn't have any private sector experience. So he's as useless a president as you will ever have. Then you have Kamala Harris. getting back to the Brett Kavanaugh stuff, my first introduction to her, whatever you want to call it, my first introduction to her was the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, and she started it off being incredibly disrespectful. And that's not, disrespect is not the biggest thing. I understand Trump is very disrespectful, but hear me out. Senator Chuck Grassley of the Judiciary Committee in the Senate, when they were trying to confirm Brett Kavanaugh, opened up one of the meetings, and he has to say, "We are here today on January 4th of blah 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 blah." You know, they have to go through that stuff. And while he was making those opening comments, she cut him off to highlight that there had been a document dumped the night before and that they needed more time to go through it. That could have waited, but she didn't want to do it. She wanted to interrupt for a complete crap reason. It was very disrespectful, and Chuck Grassley actually was very, very respectful about the whole thing himself, which is cool. Wasn't happy about it, but he was respectful about it. He was not that, he did not get loud or crazy. And that was my first interaction with her, and I was like, wow, man, that sucks. She seems like a dirtbag and kind of a bee. Sorry, ladies, but kind of a bee. And then it moved on, and her campaign kind of fizzled out. She tried to attack Joe Biden for being racist when he was the VP of Barack Obama. I'm not even saying that Joe Biden might not be racist. I'm not even saying that, like, I don't know, but I doubt it. But as a line of attack, it's one of the dumbest lines of attack ever. You have to be so tone deaf to think that would work. It's crazy. She's a terrible politician. And then she got kneecapped because she's a total corrupt dirtbag by Tulsi Gabbard. Please go check out that video. And so Kamala just disappointed me time after time. She's just terrible. And then I follow all kinds of people on Instagram in the political world, as many as I can. She's one of them. And she shared, and so this I just want to highlight a point, and you know what? I'll talk a little bit about, I already talked about Trump and Pence, so I'll leave it with this. No matter who it is in politics, anyone can say something brilliant and amazing. Kamala Harris shared on her post on her Instagram that she believes in backfilling paying $1 billion at the federal level to backfill the rape kit however much the money was. I think it was $1 billion, that she said she would be willing to pay it in order to clear out the backlog of rape kits, to make sure that every rape gets a rape kit so they can collect evidence, prosecute the whole deal. That was, and I understand, like, lots of people have said it. My cousin said it years ago, that this was a problem. My cousin, who was 17 at the time, said it. But it moved me. It made me realize that, like, hey, anyone, even someone that's a dirtbag and a hollow shell, can really push a good agenda forward and have something good to say. And it's true. That's the rape kit issue. Rape generally is a problem we really, really need to come around on and face. So anyone can have a really, really great political opinion, and you can't anyone can have a really great political opinion, and you can't judge them for it. You gotta listen to everybody. Okay. I actually thought I was gonna cut it off, but I have one more topic I have to get through. And I will do a video about systemic racism because it deserves its own video, but for now I'm going to do the condensed version of it. Systemic racism is real. The legacy of white supremacy is real in the United States, but it is a bipartisan beast. It is deeper and more subtle and more cunning than anyone is really giving it credit for. And one of the aspects of that is police brutality. Now, in terms of murders, blacks are not disproportionately targeted for murder when you take into account crime and all that, but that's because they're stuck in such heavily crime-ridden areas and just hellholes that they have been stuck in, that they've been forced in by our system in many ways, that it gets masked in that any of the police brutality that is actually there. Like, if 9 out of the 10 guys are criminals that I'm dealing with, and the 10th guy is not a criminal, but I still beat the crap out of him, it's going to be very difficult to actually find that in the numbers. So it's very much true that it's there. Moving on. Not even murders, but taking it one level below that, just excessive force in the process of arresting someone. That is definitely way more excessive force is used against African Americans. I think it's 25%, which is huge. There's 45 million. There's 45 million Black Americans, and there's 900,000 cops. That's a lot of interactions. So that's a lot of abuse that's happening, and it needs to be fixed. And I don't understand. I have not heard the only argument I've heard from anybody that supports any amount of qualified immunity existing is to just keep lawsuits from cops. And I'm like, most people don't just sue for nothing. Anyways, most people don't sue for nothing. It's a crap argument. You can hire lawyers at the police department to protect against excessive civil lawsuits if they're crap. But to keep someone from being able to hold someone accountable in the court of law, and that person is a law enforcement officer, is insane. It's insane. And it's so insane that it has to have insane counterbalances, like you're going to bankrupt all police and all of history in order to keep it in place, because it's that insane. So we need to at least modify qualified immunity. Colorado has already done something to this effect. We need to keep an eye out in Colorado and see what happens. But number one thing, you cannot blame Republicans for this. You cannot blame conservatives for this. You cannot blame America as a whole for this. You have to blame the individual police departments, the individual police, and the individual mayors in charge of these police departments, and DA, district attorneys, and all that. We need a system outside of the current legal system that still works just the same way. It's still a part of it, but just like a parallel one that actually investigates mayors, investigates cops, investigates sheriffs, and looks for malfeasance, and looks for evidence of bad things having happened because of that person. Because if we don't have that, then so much of the dirty insider trading of the mayor and the sheriff both beat their wife, so they let each other get away with it. We can't allow those kinds of things to be happening and to continue. So we have to cut those out. That requires local accountability, which means us, me, you, us, have to look at our local communities, get involved, understand who your mayor is, understand who your city councilmen are, and get involved in reforming your local police, because we can't allow this to continue to happen, and it can't be solved at the national level. It just can't. You can't have a bureaucracy set up in Washington, D.C., even if it has offices everywhere, cannot watch 330 million people or 900,000 officers. You need to have local focus and an accountable citizenry as well. So police brutality is absolutely real. Systemic racism is absolutely real, but it's not as simple as the Democrats or the left-wingers want you to think. Now, so that's one thing. George Floyd did have drugs in his system that could have contributed to him having the clear signs of anxiety and shortness of breath and absolute terror and panic that he showed before he was ever on the ground. None of that is absolutely real. None of that factors into the fact that a guy, that the policeman, Chauvin, had his knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, or at least more than 8 minutes, and he said, "I can't breathe, get off my neck, I can't breathe." Sorry if there's an accent coming through there. I don't remember what he actually sounded like, and I'm just trying to get through this video. And he stayed on his neck. while he was saying he couldn't breathe. There's no getting around that. There's no getting around that. And it's it feeds into all of the worst assumptions about right-wingers when right-wingers talk about, well, he had this problem in his system, he was a criminal, he had this history. It's like, okay, and he was not a threat to anybody. He was laying face down on the ground, and an officer kept his knee on his neck when he said he couldn't breathe. And for those of you who don't know, there's a position called knee on belly. Very simple. You just dig your knee into someone's belly while they're on their back and you're on top of them, and you can pin them down. You're kind of keeping their hips in place so they can't move as much, and you can usually control their upper body with your upper body to keep them very well controlled. This is the kind of thing you dig into someone's center mass, where their hips are and where their maximum force is, to keep them pinned down with all of your body weight. That was the position that he was using on this man's neck, face down, which just makes it all the more violent. If you were laying on your back and you had someone go there, they could choke you out, and then eventually you die, or hopefully you pass out from blood or whatever, and it's all cool. When it's this way, up against some cement, and that dude was choked. That dude was suffering. That dude suffered, and then eventually he died, and for sure it was because of that damage. That cop was just completely out of line, and he needs to be held accountable. And there's no way of getting around that. And anger is absolutely justified. Extreme anger, outrage is justified for what happened to George Floyd. But we are in a pandemic. And you cannot, if you're paying attention to the data, you cannot ignore the fact that we had 500,000 people on the streets within 2 weeks of George Floyd's murder. 500,000 people plus, hundreds of thousands of people, and they stayed in the streets for 6 to 10 weeks, depending on where they were, continuously, night after night, demonstrating, and in some cases, rioting. And on the rioting side, we have Antifa, who's a real organization. Just because they have a decentralized command doesn't make them not a real organization. And when you say that, you look like a fool, because we've seen them burning down buildings and calling themselves Antifa. We've seen them commit assault on Andy Ngo and call themselves Antifa. So if you seriously think that there's no violent organization named Antifa, it's because you've been sold out. You've bought into the propaganda. And then Black Lives Matter. So you have the slogan Black Lives Matter. Obviously Black Lives Matter, but all lives matter, and the emphasis on just Black lives creates a disconnect for those who have an individualist mindset. It's not that because politics makes everything extra volatile, people react too intensely to this, but the reality is, like, no one's in favor of a citizen being abused by a policeman in an unfair way. Like, almost nobody, except for the cop doing it and some weirdos. But for the most part, no one believes that's okay. But some people are individualists and don't like everything being made about race, because in New York we saw their patrol shove over a 95-year-old white man. We've seen an 11-year-old white boy get shot by cops. We've seen a 17-year-old white girl get shot by cops. It happens to more than just the black community. Police abuse more than just the black community. So when you just say Black Lives Matter, it's a little bit too narrowly focused, because it's obviously a problem that expands beyond that. But they like the phrase, and they'll defend the phrase, because the movement is only the best parts of the movement and not any of the bad parts of the movement. And it's not the organization, but it's definitely not All Lives Matter either, because that's racist. I've heard that too. I've been told that the All Lives Matter phrase is a dog whistle for white supremacy. That's a belief that all lives matter. When you're saying Black Lives Matter, you're just reiterating the value of all lives matter in a unique way. And what you're saying, and what people have told me, is that you're saying Black Lives Matter too. We're ignoring this problem just because it doesn't affect non-blacks. Now, I disagree. I think we're ignoring this problem because it's been politicized, because it's been racialized, because racism has been politicized by the left. If you told any American that the government was abusing citizens and we need to do something about it right now, they would all jump and say, how high? They would all jump right there and say, what can I do? You know? But if you say, we have a problem with systemic racism, and one of the aspects of that, wait, systemic racism, what do you mean? We're in the system. We're in the system. Well, it's in the ether, it's in the air, it's in the people. Well, so people are racist? No, it's in the system. It's there. It's just there. And if you don't think it's there, if you even challenge me on the idea that it's there, you're a racist. Because being a racist is just the word that we use when we don't have an argument. Unless it's about sex, or it can be about sex. Then it's sexism that we use. Anyways, I lost my train of thought there. Black Lives Matter is a fine movement. Their organization is total crap. They are Marxist. They actually believe in trying to destroy Western civilization. And if you don't understand what that means is that the worst of communist Russia is what they want to bring here. The worst of Venezuela is what they want to bring here. If you're Marxist, it's because you're either ignorant or evil. One or the other. It's as simple as that. And for someone who is Marxist to say that capitalism is evil is probably politicized, because they probably hate evil super corporations and like a select portion of capitalism, but they're like, but capitalism is the devil, and then yeah, that's a whole nother thing. Anywho, no one should be protesting. And now I remember where this whole rant was going. Just because it's for a good cause doesn't mean that protesting en masse during a pandemic doesn't have consequences. If you pay attention to the data, in early June, when we had 500,000 people out there protesting, all the way through till now, when it started to dial down, if you pay attention to the protest numbers, when that started, and as it's come down, and you compare and contrast that to the numbers when COVID had the second outbreak, they're parallel. They're exactly the same. You can't ignore those timelines. That once a bunch of people got out into the streets and started gathering en masse, really close and tight, not always wearing a mask, particularly people of color, so they're disproportionately vulnerable, or at least for whatever the comorbid reasons, whatever it is. Even put that aside, man, because it's a lot of young people, so they're probably pretty safe. Just putting hundreds, tens of thousands of people in a single city together in a tight group when you have a disease that's going around is going to accelerate the rate at which that disease goes around, and it did. And because it's politically expedient to do so, left-wingers ignore it. But it's the truth. So we have 175,000 deaths right now. Before the riots, we had 120,000, and it looked like it was about to hit zero. So 55,000 people have died since then, and it's very difficult to not blame that on the protests, for me. Now, I understand people have different opinions, but guess what? You're not me, so I get to have my own. And I think that the evidence very clearly shows that those protests contributed to that. So I don't think anyone should be contributing. I am very much in a contributing. I don't think anyone should be protesting during a pandemic. I think you should vote. We can show up and safely vote on November. Dr. Fauci, everyone's favorite doctor, said it himself. If we social distance and wear masks, which is not a big ask, we can go and we can check the boxes, which obviously we can do. So there's no real reason why we can't do that. There's no logical reason why we can't vote, and there's no logical reason why we can't solve these problems with our voting. Instead of with protesting, instead of with violence, instead of with large demonstrations and chaos. So, anywho, all right, I think I'm done ranting for today. Tune in soon. It won't be tomorrow actually, but tune in soon for fixing the economy A to Z. That'll be great if you want to get the most condensed but most thorough understanding of economics you'll find in politics. Tune into that episode. Peace, everybody.